Hi, it is Sunday, September 29th, 2024. Our church is based in Rocky Mount, North Carolina. If you're seeing this in another place, we're in the eastern part of the state. The western part of our state and several others were devastated the last several days with the hurricane. We've seen widespread damage, loss of life, loss of property, loss. I try really hard to do three things in circumstances like this. I pray, and I pray specifically for God to bring healing and hope, for the mending of relationships and the recovery, for the ability to see priorities, and for wisdom and strength for leaders who have to make difficult decisions. So I pray for those things. The second thing I try to do is I try to, as far as I can, make a difference for somebody. And if I can't do that, the third thing I do is try to make a connection so that somebody else can help them. Sometimes it's those I don't know who you know, putting people together. It's not what you know, it's who you know. I invite you to do those three things if you have the opportunity, and if you have a connection to someone who has experienced loss this weekend. So our text today is Mark 9:30 through 37. We're going through the middle of the Gospel of Mark, all the different stories of teaching and healing. This one has an interesting twist. Jesus and the disciples left that place where they were and passed through Galilee. Jesus did not want anyone to know where they were because he was teaching his disciples. He said to them, "The Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men. They will kill him, and after 3 days he will rise." But the disciples did not understand the lesson. They did not understand what he meant, and they were afraid to ask him about it. As they traveled, they came to Capernaum. When he was in the house with them, he asked them, "What were you arguing about on the road?" But they kept quiet because on the way they'd argued about who was the greatest. And sitting down, Jesus called them close to him, and he said, "Anyone who wants to be first must be very last and the servant of all." And then he took a little child whom he placed among them, and taking the child in his arms, he said to them, "Whoever welcomes one of these little children in my name welcomes me. And whoever welcomes me doesn't welcome just me, but the one who sent me." A couple attended a dinner where they didn't know anyone at their table, and they were seated next to an older man who was wearing an ill-fitted blazer and looked out of place, and the evening was brutally boring. But then someone mentioned Africa in the news, and someone else asked the man if he'd ever been there, and yes, he had been there. As a matter of fact, he spent 3 years as a political prisoner there, 34 months in one cell. As soon as he said that, everybody at the table had questions. And they discovered that this man was a boxing champion. He had multiple engineering plants, and there was a famous Hollywood star that was vying for the rights to his life story. The wife leaned over to the husband on their way out. It kind of makes you wonder what else people might say if you just keep asking questions. When I counsel couples before a wedding, we talk a lot about the different topics that they're going to face in their relationship: money, trust, communication. My wife and I came up with a phrase a long time ago that has helped our marriage through the years. It's finish the conversation. It's sort of along the lines of don't go to bed mad, don't let dust settle on your feelings, but it's deeper than that. Say what you need to say. finish the conversation. And when I explain it to young couples, it's amazing how much they want to talk about that. About not going separate ways during conflict and breaking the bad habits of storming out and slamming doors and finishing the conversation, staying at it. Because a big part of getting along and managing conflict and nurturing relationships and finding resolution is asking that next question, asking one more question, going a little bit deeper. You watch a 3-year-old for 5 minutes and you get the model for that. They understand. Maybe that's why Jesus brought a kid into the conversation. Asking questions is one of the ways that we learn about the world and people around us. And kids are just notorious for asking questions. But something happens to us adults when we grow up. We stop asking questions. Why are we hesitant to ask questions? Look at me asking a question. We've all had the teacher say, the only stupid question is the one that you don't ask. But the truth is, sometimes asking a question, especially in front of a group of people, makes us uncomfortable and it makes us feel insecure. Please don't call on me. Please don't call on me. In this gospel story, this is the second of 3 heads up that Jesus gives to his disciples, 3 predictions of what's going to happen. Each time Jesus tells the disciples exactly what's going to happen. When they go to Jerusalem, he's going to be betrayed. He's going to be put into the hands of the powers that be. He is going to be killed, dead. And he will rise again. He will no longer be dead. I know the whole story, and I have questions about that. But clearly the disciples just don't understand. What is he talking about? And how could they? I think this is an invitation for the disciples to grow up, to dig deeper. They were just starting to grasp that Jesus might be a little bit more than a teacher and a miracle worker. Peter actually called him the Messiah. He identifies Jesus as the Christ, the Messiah. He got something right, but then nobody followed up on it. At the beginning of Mark 9, just before today's story, 3 of the disciples went with Jesus up a mountain and saw this miraculous thing with the heritage of their faith, the transfiguration. Mark's gospel is coming to a climax, and they're just beginning to understand that Jesus is special, unique, different, but they don't understand. Because their concept of Messiah is something very different from what Jesus was. The kind of Messiah they expected, this warrior, liberator, soldier on a horse, wasn't what they were getting. Somebody who gets betrayed and killed, rise again. What could that possibly mean? They must have had questions, but they were confused and afraid and silent. Fear, anxiety, uncertainty kept them quiet. They didn't ask Jesus what he meant. Science fiction writer Theodore Sturgeon believed in the power of questions. He wrote an article, Ask the Next Question. Sturgeon says, every advance this species has ever made is the result of someone somewhere looking at his world, his neighborhood, his neighbor, his cave, or himself, and asking the next question. And every deadly error this species has committed, every sin against itself and its high destiny, is the result of not asking the next question, or of not listening to those who ask it. The disciples' fear of asking the next question is demonstrated by their argument over petty issues, rank and status. They're playing musical chairs on the deck of the Titanic. And Jesus had modeled the kind of behavior that he expected from them, showing us that greatness doesn't come from proving we're better than somebody else, but willingly choosing to be with the least and the lost and the last. Whoever wants to be first must be last and servant of all. And to drive it home, he puts a kid in front of them. Whoever welcomes a child like this in my name welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me welcomes the one who sent me. See, you got to understand, children weren't just vulnerable. They didn't just depend on the adults for survival. Children had no protection, no legal status, no familial relationship until they were of age. They were physically and culturally the lowest of all. They had nothing to offer, no honor, no status, things that were very important in their culture. So for Jesus to tell his disciples, who just finished arguing about who was the greatest among them, that they had to welcome him by welcoming a lowly child, it must have been quite a moment for them. Wait, what? All their ideas about greatness and power, all their ideas about what God was going to do with the Messiah and the importance and the prestige and the power and the wealth and success, all of it turned completely upside down. We know what it's like when our obsession with power or privilege takes over our curiosity, keeps us from asking the next question because we don't want to embarrass ourselves. We all know that panicked look when the boss asks on the way out of a meeting, "Any questions?" And we all nod like we understood, but we absolutely did not understood. We've seen it in our politics, posturing about the solutions to the problem while those in need suffer and wait for a solution. And they suffer and wait because it benefits them to keep the problem alive. It benefits the people in power to keep the problem alive because then they have something to rail against and talk against. We see it in the way our fear makes us demonize those with whom we disagree. So instead of asking the question, like, can you tell me more about that? Why do you see it that way? We're just silent. We act like everybody knows. We just assume that everybody knows. And we end up more frustrated than we began. We remain ignorant of things that might actually be beneficial to know. More angry, more divided, more helpless, and more disconnected from God. Is that how you want to be? Is that your best outcome? Christianity encourages us to engage other people, to expand the tent, to widen the reach, to broaden the conversation. But we choose our own way with our own people for our own ends, time and time and time again. And Jesus wants his disciples to do better, and I know that he'd like us to do better too. Finish the conversation. Ask the next question. Get involved with other people. Because difficult conversations are important, because new understandings can be found and options can be changed. Resolving conflict is important, because souls can be saved and hurts can be mended and surprising relationships will grow. God promises life and life more abundant, but we have to be in the game to understand that and to know that and to participate in that. All of this today depends on our willingness to see God at work, not only in us, but in other people. All of that depends on our enthusiasm and our energy to push past our fear and our insecurity, to be willing to ask questions, because questions keep the conversation going. The good news is that God wants that for us, but we might have to humble ourselves. We might have to admit that we don't already have it all figured out. We don't already have all the answers. We might have to expose our ignorance, reveal our lack, our emptiness. But it also reveals our curiosity, our willingness to learn and to grow and to change. To ask the next question and the next and even the next one is how we open ourselves to other people and how we open ourselves to God. Asking the next question is, in Jesus' words, how we welcome one another. It's how we seek understanding. The good news this morning is that you and I are part of God's story in the world. And sometimes we need to be more engaged in what God has going on. Where people are hurting or they're hungry, seeking a better life, we can actually be the hands and the feet and the answer for their question. When they're seeking deeper answers, sometimes they can be found when we finish the conversation and ask the next question.